All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Leanne Moody. I am the Executive Director of the Short-Term Emergency Aid Committee, also known as STEAC, like the food. I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this community conversation about how we can best support our neighbors in need. The mission at STEAC is to provide immediate short-term assistance with basic necessities to Yolo County families and individuals with incomes below the poverty level. In addition, STEAC is committed to enlarging the social awareness of the community and to provide opportunities for local citizens to help others in need. And it's the second part of that mission that really brings us here tonight and is our focus in creating these speaker events. We are trying to provide a forum for local experts in fields related to STEAC's mission, including poverty, homelessness, and food insecurity, to provide their knowledge and perspective to our state community of staff, volunteers, and donors. Our intention is to add to the community conversation around poverty and to increase the public awareness to inform our actions as individuals and as an organization. We have some amazing speakers for you tonight, and we're super excited. I'm going to hand things over to Katie Zane, who's going to give introductions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Katie Zane. I'm the Grants Manager at STEAC. For tonight's webinar, we will have speaker introductions and then a 40 to 50-minute presentation, followed by a short Q&A session. We have 3 speakers tonight, which is really wonderful. We're excited for that. Nolan Sullivan is the Agency Director of the Yolo County Health and Human Services Agency, an integrated super agency, including social services, mental health, and substance abuse, and public health. Nolan began his career with the Yolo County Department of Social Services in 2007. Over the last decade, he has held numerous positions in the department, including 5 years as the agency's Service Center Branch Director, overseeing a team of 300 and servicing the welfare and employment needs of over 65,000 Yolo County residents annually. He is widely known for his commitment to the clients, deep compassion for the employees doing the work, and his energetic optimism in leading the agency. Nolan has a bachelor's degree from California State University, Chico, and a master's degree in public administration from the University of San Francisco. Dr. Rose Kagawa, I hope I said that correctly, is an associate professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at UC Davis, a faculty member with the Violence Prevention Research Program, and a faculty affiliate with the Center for Regional Change. Dr. Kagawa uses epidemiologic methods to identify opportunities for fostering greater community safety and well-being, and to evaluate social and firearm policies. Her current topics of study include mapping the features of the community safety environment, evaluation of a basic income program for unstably housed families, and the implementation of background checks for firearm transfers. She received her PhD in epidemiology and her master's in public health from UC Berkeley. I have to just say go Bears, because my husband is a cult member of the Cal Bears fan club. He made me do that. Dr. Catherine Brinkley is an associate professor in human ecology, community, and regional development in the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at UC Davis. With a PhD in city and regional planning, a veterinary medical degree, and a master's in virology, her research focuses on health and design. She is a former Fulbright Scholar, Watson Fellow, and National Science Foundation Career Award winner. Dr. Brinkley has published on topics such as healthy food systems, local government planning and decision-making, and sustainable development. She currently serves as director for the Center for Regional Change, a university research center that partners with local governments and nonprofits for engaged scholarship that centers on social equity. Her work is used internationally by the United National Food Agriculture Organization, as well as local communities, to guide plans and policies. Very impressive, all 3 of you. With that, I'm turning it over to the speakers.
Okay, I think, am I kicking us off, Katie? Is that the plan? All right.
Yeah,
well,
sure, yes.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, thank you so much. My name is Nolan Sullivan. I am your Friendly Neighborhood Health and Human Services Agency Director, and I'm so excited to be here today. I'm going to share my screen, so give me a second here to get everything all situated. Let's see. And if I were to share my screen, I would click this and I would click that. All right. Okay, all right. We're here talking about YOBI. YOBI is the YOLO Basic Income Pilot here in Yolo County. It's a pretty revolutionary program. I've got, I think, 10 or 11 slides here that I'm going to go through just to talk about sort of the program design, what it's all about, kind of what we're doing in the county. And then we have some awesome additions on the research side from Catherine Brinkley and Rose Kagawa next, which really show the impact that it's making and kind of how I think one of the most exciting things about the program is we have the hometown research team researching the hometown program, which is really cool. So we'll hear a little more about that in just a second. So again, the goal of YOBI from the get-go was to essentially see if we could break the cycle of generational poverty amongst Yolo County families that are using the CalWORKS program or the TANF program or the welfare program. All three kind of mean the same thing. And if we could set those kids on a different trajectory and help change their lives for good. So the first slide that we have in the deck here is the most important slide, and this is where I always start. We're talking about people, and we're talking about really beautiful families and kids with dreams and moms and dads that want to do better and help their kids move along in the world. These are not canned photos. These are actually photos of our families, some of which are in the pilot. These are real Yolo County men, women, and children. And it's always good to kind of ground ourselves and center ourselves in the fact that we are talking about people and notably kids. So again, these are some of the folks that this program is helping that we're talking about today, and they are awesome. Why Yolo County? Yolo County has the sad distinction of having the deepest poverty rate out of all 58 counties. So according to the Public Policy Institute of California, Yolo County has the highest adjusted poverty rate out of all 58. We come in at 20.9%. This is the latest PPIC data. So I would say if you're going to start a poverty reduction program or a program to really address big challenges with family homelessness, why not start somewhere that has the deepest problem or the biggest challenge? So surprisingly, Yolo County, like I said, has the award for the deepest poverty in the county or in the state, which is something that I think a lot of people find shocking, but is sadly true. What is generational poverty? And so again, the pilot kind of set out to answer a couple different questions. Really, it started with a couple of my staff saying they have a term, it's called multi-gen family is what the staff would say. And I said, what is a multi-gen family, right? And I heard my workers talking about it. And a multi-gen family is when you have a case manager or a social worker that has had multiple generations of the same family on their caseload throughout their career. So we were finding that in many cases, my social workers would have maybe great-grandma, grandma, mom, and now baby, all within the span of a 10, 20, 30-year career on a CalWORKS caseload, right? Really showing that the social services programs, the safety net in California was not working. It was not helping break the cycle of generational poverty. And generational poverty is defined as a family having lived in poverty for at least 2 generations, right? There's also situational poverty. Any one of us who loses our job, has a debilitating illness, something really bad happens, can be in situational poverty. But we're talking about families that generation in, generation out continue to kind of go through this really awful cycle. Some of the key distinctions of generational poverty versus situational poverty is a sort of sense of hopelessness, or this is where I belong, or this is what I deserve. Surviving versus planning. Oftentimes you're worried about where you're going to sleep at night, how you're going to feed your child their next meal. You're not worried about self-actualization or going to school or making your life better or things of that sort. You're just worried about how the heck you're going to pay that phone bill or where you're going to park your car without getting towed that afternoon. So it makes it really hard to really plan for your future, plan for your children's future, and really kind of take a deep breath and figure out a better way forward. And then the last is values and patterns. The way I like to explain this the most, it's not a good thing, a bad thing, it just is what it is. Many of us go to the bank and we go to the post office and we go to the grocery store and then we go to work. In a lot of cases, as you experience these issues as a young child, you go to the food bank and you go to the welfare office and you go to the employment development department and you do these different, and it becomes normalized and it becomes sort of this generational pattern that folks just kind of know and follow. So really thinking about, can we break this cycle for these families? And that's kind of where the question for what YOBI is started. So when you're talking about something like alleviating poverty for family or young children, where do you start, right? It's such a big, scary, monstrous problem. How do you solve world hunger, right? How do you solve homelessness? Such a big, huge, monstrous problem. We found a pretty ingenious targeting method here in Yolo County. And so we started to think, what if we targeted specific groups, right? Instead of a random lottery like many other basic income programs, what if we targeted families that we know are in the deepest poverty, have the most risk for child welfare involvement, the most risk for the criminal justice system, for substance abuse, for early death, all those really, really bad things. And we know, unfortunately, that families in the CalWORKs program oftentimes have much higher rates of all these negative outcomes. So YOLO First Five, who's an awesome partner, was one of our first funders. They came to us and said, hey, we love this idea. We want to help. And so obviously with YOLO First Five, we're going to focus on kids under the age of 5. We have the added value of focusing on children that are in their formative years. There's all sorts of brain development and really important things that happen from 0 to 5. And so we started thinking, all right, well, maybe 0 to 5 is our target. So if we know CalWORKs families have all these really negative health outcomes and these really negative outcomes socially, and First Five has all these really great facts on why you should focus with kids 0 to 5. What if we focused on CalWORKs families with children under the age of 5? That was our target group, right? And we know them, we can identify them, they're connected to us. And so that's where we started. We went one step even further. So within the CalWORKs program, there are actually a subset of the program. There's about 1,000 families in Yolo County on CalWORKs at any given time. It's a pretty static number. It's been about that 1,000 mark for like the last 10 years. It stays pretty consistent. Of those 1,000 families, though, about 100, about 10% are in what's called HSP. HSP is the Homeless Services Program, and HSP means that the family is A, on CalWORKs, B, they're homeless or housing insecure. So they're living in a shelter, they're living in a car, they're living in an encampment, or they have a 3-day pay or quit or an imminent threat of eviction. They are entitled to a program called HSP, which is operated a little differently in most counties. Not all counties have it. And it allows us to pay for rent, we can pay for utilities, we can buy furniture, we can do pretty much whatever it takes to stably house that family as soon as possible. And so at the time that we ran the study, there were 11,418 5-year-olds and under in Yolo County. So that's the whole group. So we just wanted to focus on 5-year-old kids and their families. We've got 11,418. There were 704 kids 5 or under on CalWORKs. And so it's a much smaller slice of the pizza, a much more targeted slice to go for. However, there were 76 kids at the time that were under the age of 5 on the CalWORKs HSP program. So our hypothesis was that if you really focus intensive efforts on the neediest kids, the kids that you know are the most disadvantaged, the bang for your buck is amplified, right? And so we began our pilot by focusing on CalWORKs families with children under the age of 5 that were on the HSP program, and that equated to 76 children or 67 families. So it's weird how it transposes, but 67 families, 76 kids is how that all worked out. And so we ended up with our pilot group, and that was 67 families. And we did not include or exclude anybody. As long as you were on CalWORKs HSP and you had a kid under the age of 5 at the time, you were included in the pilot. So there was no lottery, there was no random drawing. We focused on these families solely because we knew they needed the help. The other thing I should mention is I talk really fast and get excited. If you need me to slow down or repeat or whatever, or interrupt and ask questions, it's all good. I don't mind. I don't have a good teaching cadence, so please feel free to tell me to slow down. The other really cool sort of inadvertent impact to this program is it actually has some really great equity impacts sort of inadvertently. So the program pilot just so happened to work out to really sort of flip some of the negative demographic issues that we have in government service on its head. So we know that there's a massive disparity with, for example, Black children in the child welfare system. Well, about 3% of our overall population here in Yolo County identify as Black. Almost 27% of our foster youth are Black. And so we have a major overrepresentation of Black children in the foster system. You could say the same for Hispanic families. We have the same for Indigenous families. We have a major overrepresentation of families of color or children of color or people of color in all sorts of things, whether you're talking about the local criminal justice system, foster care, you name it. Unfortunately, government has done harms, and unfortunately, the byproduct of those harms is we have overrepresentation of folks in certain negative areas. However, Yobi sort of flips that on its head. It actually brings more resources to Black families. It brings more resources to Hispanic families in sort of, and there's probably a technical term for this, Catherine, but I keep saying negative disproportionality, so I'm sure there's a better way to say that, but it flips it on its head and actually brings more resources to historically marginalized families across the county. So while 3% of the population is Black in Yolo County, 20%, 1 in 5 of our families in Yobi is a Black family. And you see the same trends for Hispanic families, a slightly same trend for Indigenous families. And it actually helps bring more resources to people who were historically harmed through a variety of different systems, which I think is a really cool sort of inadvertent outcome of this pilot. What is Yobi? You guys have heard me talk about targeting and all these different bits and pieces, and I've showed you some cool pictures. What the heck is the program, right? And so Yobi, simply put, is that we are focusing on families that are on the HSP program that have a child under the age of 5. The really unique thing with this program is we don't give a set dollar amount, and I'll explain this a little further on a further slide. We actually give the family $1 above the California poverty minimum. So not only are we giving the families money, we're literally giving them a benefit amount that pulls them $1 above poverty in California. So every family has a different benefit amount. The average amount is $1,200 per month, but each family's grant per month is tailored differently. So what we're actually doing is literally pulling a family below the poverty line, above the poverty line for 24 full months. So it's a 2-year pilot. We actually just ended our last payment in April of 2024. Unfortunately, Yolo County has a monstrous poverty rate of 20.6%. We are looking at CalWORKs housing support families with kids under the age of 5. And we are so lucky to have our UC Davis partners study this pilot and hopefully establish all of the good that something like this can actually do. So a couple of things that I like to highlight is it's a very focused and targeted approach, right? It's a really cost-effective way to target families and provide support to those families. The second is we're really trying to impact generational homelessness and really see if we can turn the needle or kind of bend the curve or whatever saying you want to say for these kids as they grow up. And then the last is, can we impact future reliance on public social services programs? Could early intervention and significant investment reduce future utilization of programs like CalWORKs? Could it help kind of set these kids on a different trajectory? And the last thing that I don't have on this slide, but I always like to add, is we did it on a budget. We did it without adding additional staff. We did it without adding an additional agency. The really beautiful thing about this pilot is we took an existing government program that in my mind is pretty boring and bland, and we added the basic income pilot on top of it. So I didn't have to hire more staff. I didn't need funding for overhead for buildings and office space. I didn't need to pay for electricity or all those different things. I already had the team. What I didn't have was enough money for these families to really self-actualize and survive. So it's a really scalable and cost-effective way to combat deep poverty for families. And my hope at the end of this is that we catch the attention of the governor's office or catch the attention of someone at the state and they say, hey, this is cost effective, it's efficient, and it has great outcomes. Let's scale this across the state of California. That's kind of the big picture goal for this program. This is kind of old, so I won't, the numbers have changed a little bit on the right side, but this breaks down how we actually get to each family's benefit amount on the left-hand side. So for example, your average family of 4, and just so you guys know, the average family in the Yobi pilot was 2.5. So typically it was single mom, single dad, and 2 kids. The CalWORKs maximum grant for a family of 4, shockingly, this is what a family of 4 on CalWORKs or welfare gets, $1,122 a month. So if you can imagine paying your rent, paying your bills, paying your car payment, all those different things. Yeah, they get CalFresh or food stamps and they get Medi-Cal, but the CalWORKs program gives a family of 4 $1,122 a month to survive. You multiply that by 24 months and they have $27,000 roughly. The California poverty minimum, which is a Stanford means tested number they put out every year based on your family size and whether you rent or own a house, basically declares you have to have this much money or above to be living out of poverty in California, in that area. So the CPM for that same family says they must be earning almost $62,000 for that same 24-month period of time. So this particular family has a shortfall of almost $35,000. They're living below the poverty line to the tune of about $35,000 over this 24-month period of time. So in this particular family's instance, what we would do then is we would give them a basic income payment of $1,451.98 per month. And that would literally pull them $1 above the California poverty minimum for that full 24-month period of time. So we're not giving them $500 or $300 or some random lottery. We literally giving each family a tailored benefit amount that targets specifically getting them above the poverty line, which we think is pretty cool. Some of our big funders early on, Yolo First Five was great. The county chipped in $500,000. In fact, they chipped in even more after the fact. We have a grant through the Office of Child Abuse and Prevention. We have a grant through Sutter Health. The Sierra Health Foundation made a big contribution. And so we had quite a bit of fundraising. So I apologize, I haven't updated this slide in quite a while. The total program costs us about $3.2 million, and that includes a sizable in-kind deduction and support from UC Davis and Katie's team. But all in all, 24 months, 67 families, $3 million. It sounds like a lot. When you break down the math, it really isn't that much. And it made a lot of good, we hope. Lastly, what are we trying to learn from this? And this, Katie and Rose will talk a lot more about kind of the study aspects of this, but really from the county's vantage point, we wanted to know about scalability. Could this be scaled? Could this be moved to other counties? Could it be moved statewide? One of the big areas we're really focused on is stress reduction. Can we reduce toxic stress for mom and dad? Can we reduce stress for baby and kids? Really kind of keeping the stress levels low to help folks with all sorts of other health outcomes and other development outcomes. Education and career attainment for both the kids and mom and dad. Did the kids' grades improve? Did their school attendance improve? Did mom and dad go back to school? Did mom and dad get a better job? Spending trend data, we have some access to see where people are spending their money, and no, it's not on alcohol and cigarettes. It's the first question I get every time. It's spent on rent, it's spent on food, on car payments, on necessities. We have a financial literacy component to the program where we're trying to help folks spend their money wiser instead of using a check casher with ridiculous interest rates. Open up a bank account at a local credit union. So we're trying to coach folks on using their money smarter and making those dollars go a little further. There's a big early childhood component or early childhood development component. Again, first five, time with your baby, singing with your kids, learning time, bonding time, all those really important factors Katie and her team are looking at. And the one thing that I didn't add earlier that I think is so important is we have 100, and I get the number wrong every time, but somewhere around 160 control group families. So we have 160 families in a control group that are on CalWORKs that are not receiving HSP or the basic income benefit. They're just on the pure CalWORKs program. And we are comparing everything we do to our 67 families. So we have the 67 families and 160 families. And I think I probably quoted that number wrong, but Katie will correct me. And we're comparing what are the outcomes of the control group versus the benefit group to really show the difference is the basic income pilot. So we'll be following those 160 families all the 24 months through the pilot as well. Hopefully we can extend the study. My hope is that we can extend the study 5, 10, 15 years. Hopefully this will be the last thing that Katie and I work on when we retire. But the hope is, what happens to these kids when they're 25? What happens when they have kids, right? I really want to see if this 24-month intensive intervention can bend the needle and change the trajectory of a kid who is now 5, 6, or 7 when they're 25, 26, or 27, right? Can that actually help them later in life is the big question. So we're actively fundraising for that still. So if you have a rich uncle or you know Jeff Bezos, send him my way. We're looking for some fundraising money to extend that study. But that is probably the next big step. And this is my last slide. Again, it's the most important slide, starting right where we started off. The most important part of the program is these awesome moms and dads and kids that we are trying to help move along through this program. So again, the most important part of it. And I think that is my whole spiel. And I will either hand it off to Katie or Catherine Katie, or Katie Zane Katie. If we want to take questions now, I'm happy to do that too. But that is my last slide. Oh, you might be muted, Katie. Sorry.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Great presentation. Thank you. And let's send it off to Catherine and then we'll do questions at the end.
All right, I'll go ahead and share screen, but Catherine, you're doing the talk.
Okay, all right. I've got it teed up too. We'll just pass the mic back and
Oh,
forth.
do you
Rose.
want, I'm fine if you want to do it.
Go for it.
Okay. How's that look?
That's great. Can everyone see that? All right. Well, Rose and I are going to talk a little bit about the evaluation portion of the program, and to kind of set the stage while Rose moves to the next slide, I'll just say that many countries provide a basic income to families that have children. They provide child supports, and the US provides not a whole lot in that regard. In addition, we already know that providing cash lifts children out of poverty. So the real question with why you might do a basic income project like Nolan is doing is really proof of concept. So if we roll it out in Yolo County, which has the deepest poverty of the 58 counties in California, could other health and human services agencies in the other 57 counties also stand up a program like this? So what did it cost? How many staff were involved? We're frontline staff who work with families day in and day out and often experience high burnout rates because it's a tough job, as you all know. Do they feel increased job satisfaction, hope? Do they think that it's working in their close relationships with clients? And then, as Rose is going to talk about, what can we expect in terms of moving the needle on child health and well-being and on caregiver health and well-being? And this is, again, just 2 years lifting families just above that poverty threshold for California. So I want to note that YOBI is one of the first 100 guaranteed income pilots across the nation, which is pretty incredible. Most of these pilots, so the plurality of them, are occurring in California. So there is momentum in this state and at the state level for this policy. And the other thing that sets YOBI apart from these 100 guaranteed income projects, so just a little bit of terminology. Guaranteed income means that there will be a certain amount of cash that's provided over a certain amount of time, like say $20 a month or $300 a month, whereas basic income is a basic threshold that's met. So that can be different for different families. So for a family of 7, that income threshold would be different than a family of 2, for example. And that really makes YOBI different from a lot of other guaranteed income pilots. Because again, the big question here is, well, if we give families $30 a month, is that enough to move the needle? What if we give them $300 a month? What about that? And YOBI again is, well, what if we just lift them out of poverty? What does that do? So we can go on to the next slide, Rose. So again, the rationale behind these basic income projects and guaranteed income is that unconditional cash allows families to make decisions, empowers them to make those decisions, gives them flexibility. And that cash may mean that they see that they need to spend more on, I don't know, an outfit for an interview or car repair. Or often, as Nolan pointed out, it's rent, it's food above and beyond WIC and SNAP supplements. Whoops. In addition to that, the treatment effects are likely going to differ for different groups. So many of the families have children, some of whom have diagnosed with learning disabilities, some of whom the cash supplement has helped them do those expensive diagnostics and take the time to get their child diagnosed, and that'll have long-term ripple effects in that child's life and in the community beyond. So the goal of our evaluation is to capture that both with the survey, which Rose will talk about, that compares YOBI families and control group families with national averages, and then also with peer-to-peer interview, so that we have those personal stories as well. So we go on to the next slide. I need to update our funders when you when you share them more with me, Nolan. But I'll just note that last Mother's Day, SACB highlighted some of our findings from the first year, our early findings, and we're in a conversation with them about maybe doing another issue this coming Mother's Day as well. So be on the lookout for that if you subscribe to the SACB. And as Nolan was pointing out, one of the impacts of targeting housing insecure families that are in HSP, without intending to, 90% of the households are headed by a single mother. So it's not as if this program specifically targets families of color or targets mothers. It's really focused on poverty. And that's crucial because basic income and guaranteed income programs across the country right now, there's a lot of pushback on those programs that are seeking racial justice approaches, as opposed to focusing on just the poverty threshold. So that's, by focusing on the poverty threshold, you do end up with redistribution of and a more equity focused approach. And then I also put on here the range that families are receiving on a monthly basis, the average, and then the highest dollar amount. So this is again what sets YOBI apart from some of those other programs that are looking at $300 a month in Manhattan or $30 a month versus a meaningful amount of funding. So we can go to the next slide, Rose. And I'll let you take it from here, and then I'll come back for the survey piece.
Great. So I'll talk specifically about the quantitative part of our evaluation. And I also just want to note that Nolan's team, this was a real collaboration with Nolan's team because they did the data collection for our surveys and interviews, which has been, and data management, getting data over to us. So that's been really great. So our evaluation included quantitative and qualitative components, and I will focus on the quantitative portion, and Catherine will speak a bit on the qualitative findings. This was, as Nolan mentioned, a controlled evaluation design. So we measured outcomes in the families that received the YOBI payments over time. And then we also measured outcomes for a comparison group of families that were in CalWORKs, but didn't receive YOBI payments. Now, there were some challenges in enrolling as a side note, enrolling a comparison group for this study that I could talk about if there's time, but it's relevant for some of our findings. Surveys were conducted with these families at the beginning of the program in spring of 2022. And then we asked these families the same questions again about a year later in winter and spring of 2023. Again, I should note that there was a fair amount of loss to follow-up. So fewer families responded at that 1 year wave. And we had 42 in the treated group and 44 in the control group. And we were primarily interested in housing outcomes, financial stability, the wellness of the primary caretakers, and the wellness of the children in the household that were under 6 years of age. And so we asked about housing status, economic security, feelings of safety, social cohesion and connectedness with community, internal family functioning, parent-child interactions like singing together, playing songs, reading books, parental depression, and child behavioral development. So looking at anxiety, internalizing and externalizing behaviors like anxiety and depression or aggressive behavior. All right, so we saw, sorry, finding my mouse. We saw really clear evidence of major improvements in housing stability and financial security after 1 year. I guess it was on the last slide, but just to double down, this is after 1 year of payments. And so we have yet to get data and do analysis for year 2, but I think that'll be interesting. So this is results after 1 year. So there was an 11% increase in the housing security score for YOBI families over this year. And I want to highlight one element of that scale. They say whether they agree or disagree with a statement. Overall, my life feels stable to me. And in the YOBI families, that increased, agreeing with that statement, increased by 78%. So that nearly double the number of families said they felt that their life was stable after a year. And we see a 54% increase in families renting or owning their home. And where previously many were living in more temporary situations, they were staying with friends or family or at a shelter or couch surfing. Similarly, we see major improvements in financial security. The number of families struggling to make ends meet was cut by nearly a third, And the number of families who couldn't afford basic needs like food, transportation, housing, and medical care was cut almost in half. Now, we looked at a lot of other outcomes as well, but effects on the other outcomes are a bit less clear at this point. And we see some things started really high, like perceived safety, the people's sense of safety started really high, so there wasn't really a lot of room to go, above 98% of families felt safe, not a lot of room for improvement there. And then sometimes we see things moving in a positive direction. Sometimes we see things moving in a negative direction. These tend to be much smaller movements, and at the same time, there's quite a lot of bit of movement happening in our control group over the same that same time period that we wouldn't expect and can't fully explain. But it does tell us that the changes that we see in the Yobi family, the Yobi families, they might be responding to factors in people's lives or environments that are other than the Yobi payment. So we can't draw a lot of firm conclusions about effects of Yobi payments on those outcomes at year 1. But we do have another year of data coming in, and we are excited to dig into that. And from there, I'll pass it back to you, Catherine.
Can I nudge you just to say something about maternal depression scores, though Daniel isn't here?
Yeah.
Just to provide context.
Yeah, so one of the things we looked at was the parental depression, and this is one of the challenges. We see a huge decrease in parental depressive symptoms over the time period. So, I mean, and that's a real decrease, and it's a positive thing. The thing is that the control group decreased even more. And so we can't say that that decrease was attributable to Yobi payments. It's still a good thing that happened, but it's in terms of like saying it was due to the program, it's just too hard to pull apart with the data we have.
Also to note is that the depression scores for the caregivers are much higher than the baseline, which makes sense because these are largely single mothers in poverty with children. I don't know if you have that off the top of your head, Rose. We should.
But do you want the, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I have the PowerPoint.
All right.
So except it's really hard to open things while I'm screen sharing.
All right, never mind. Well, we can pull it up in a bit. All right, we can move forward.
Okay.
All right, so what are staff saying? What are Nolan's staff saying? So I think one of the interesting pieces is that overall frontline staff are reporting job satisfaction from this. And they're also reporting that they feel like there's a lot of promise to this basic income program. And the reason this is important is because in the literature and in policy discussions, basic income or guaranteed income is sort of pitted against social services. And what makes Yobi again interesting is that staff are still providing those social services, wraparound services, and they have basic income. So we're not pitting well, what if we just pay people cash and don't provide them services? We're not pitting those conversations against each other. So this is an example of this is a quote from staff that notes that it's a win for the person, it's a win for the system because folks aren't cycling back through. Hopefully it's a win for the local economy because they have more spending power and less spillover impacts of need. And it's a win for the employer because folks are able to then get jobs and stay employed. And that I would just say that data point holds over many quantitative studies as well, that there have been numerous quantitative studies that have shown that there's not a decrease in employment with guaranteed income. Of course, it depends on who's targeted and where and all of those things. But anyway, and then the person goes on to say that win is going to be a win for everyone in every organization, whether they know it's through this pilot or not. So I think that really also speaks to the fact that everything that the research team is focusing on capturing with data, we're not going to capture it all. There will be spillover benefits beyond the study period, beyond the folks that we're interviewing and surveying more broadly. At least that's what staff is anticipating. And then we've also heard that for staff who are working the front line, that it's a really rewarding opportunity to be able to take on something new and to collaborate with others outside of the organization. So this is another hesitancy piece in the policy world where folks are saying, well, this is a lot to ask of staff that are already stretched thin, that are already doing so much with limited budgets, which is very true for Nolan staff. They are amazing. And the fact that they're excited about taking on yet another thing is really, speaks highly of the leadership and collaboration that's happening within the organization, but also of the hopefulness that's felt around basic income. And then there's another quote here that says, I like that my team was part of that beginning part of it and was able to see how much it's helped families and what their goals have been. So these were findings from year one. And now that we're entering year two, I think there's a little bit of anxiety about the program ending. And that's very normal for programs that have provided such a big buffer. So we're starting to gather and analyze that data now and figure out what the impacts are. You want to go on to the next one, Rose? So some lessons learned, we're pulling out ideas again. If Yolo Health and Human Services is able to continue this as a pilot and make it more permanent, how might other counties do it? What are the lessons learned? So this is a quote that sort of highlights that. This is setting a precedent and opening ideas and minds to the possibility that maybe certain other programs can be revamped and center more on providing the resources versus just kind of throwing money out there and not realizing that we need to do an all-around approach. It's like we're putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, So I love this quote because it gets at this idea of you can't just throw cash at the problem. There's got to be wraparound services and support and help as well. We're starting to put together the playbook of how YOBI rolled out. So how were benefits calculated, how participants received funding, how easy was that, how much staff time did that take? We can go on to the next slide. And then these are quotes from the families. So families are reporting that YOBI really helped them cover basic needs. So this quote says, without YOBI, it'd be a struggle. So my kids, it keeps a roof over their head. It keeps them with hot water or a place to play, a place to call home. It's a pretty powerful statement. This next one says, I'm able to pay my bills. I don't have to ask people for money. I don't have to go out and do prostitution anymore. So it's just been great. I pulled this quote because I think it really gets at the public discourse around worthiness and who's the worthy poor to receive aid. And I think that's a big problem that the public needs to sort of wrap its mind around. Are we committed to lifting folks out of poverty and all of the spillover benefits of that? And if so, this is a wonderful piece that shows the potential spillover impacts in families. I also pulled quotes that note that families are still experiencing financial stress even with YOBI. So this one notes, it's challenging because my mind is cloudy with financial stuff, what's going on at home, things of that nature. So it affects my productivity at work because I'm coming in and I got all these things on my mind and I'm not focusing on my job like I should be. So this is just the grind of stress of poverty, trying to figure out how to pay bills and how to balance everything. And another one that notes similarly, it's always stressful money-wise since I'm not really making a lot of money. So is YOBI enough? So we can go on to the next slide here. So as we round the bend on this last year, the second year, some of the big questions are, was YOBI enough to lift families permanently out of poverty? Is it enough to set a long-term trajectory for children? I think we'd love for it to be, but it may not be long enough. It may not be enough. We're able to show some things around housing stability, but these are bigger questions. And I'm not entirely sure that they're entirely fair questions either, because poverty is so multifactorial. And then how much improvement can we expect for families, or how much job satisfaction can we expect from staff? I mean, how great would it be if we could project out from YOBI, if every county across California rolled this out, here's what social worker staff would feel in their home department. There's a lot of context to that needs to be added. But those are the sorts of findings that will help justify continuing YOBI or perhaps expanding it. And then the last piece is, we've done a lot of thinking, and again, that article in SAC-B, thinking around what will change hearts and minds around basic income programs. So on the one hand, I think, folks can get behind ending childhood poverty, but exactly how to do it and how much funding to put behind it, and if that should roll out at the state level, those are all pieces that may need additional stories from participants. They may need more data from staff. Folks may want to know long-term economic benefits locally. So we're continuing to monitor studies and think about how we might add on to the YOBI study to answer those questions. I'll stop there and we can open for questions.
Well, thank you. That was a really great presentation and super impressive, all the things you guys are doing. I have one question. So when you obviously don't just give a family money, so can you just go into a little bit more detail about how wraparound services were made available to the families and how they were counseled?
Yeah, so every family that is enrolled is also on the CalWORKS program. So CalWORKS is called TANF at the federal level. In California, it's called CalWORKS. A lot of people call it the welfare program. Essentially, when you're on CalWORKS, you have to be working towards some form of self-sufficiency. So going to school, you've got to be working, trying to get a job, applying for a job, something to sort of better yourself. So there's lots of different carrots and sticks that they use to do that. In addition to CalWORKS, you categorically qualify for CalFresh or food stamps, as well as Medi-Cal or Medicaid. But you have a case manager. And so you're assigned to that case manager who is there to assist you in enrolling in school or helping your kids, enroll in their own school or accessing medical care or substance abuse or mental health care, all of these different wraparound services. So CalWORKS already sort of had the case management and the components a family needs to really be successful in navigating kind of how to get back on their feet. What it didn't have was at $1,122 a month, enough for that family really to survive financially. So the beautiful part of the program is the case management's already there, right? We just didn't have enough resources to give that family to really help them kind of grow and step up. One of the things we also added to YOBI, though, is we added peer support workers, peer support navigators through the Yolo County Children's Alliance. And so we've actually hired a series of folks who've been on the TANF program that are now working for this local nonprofit to assist folks in some of their struggles and challenges, to assist with collecting survey data, to provide benefits navigation and support and assistance, to provide some peer mentoring. So we've also provided kind of that secondary component. And then lastly, we have Travis Credit Union that is doing a little bit of financial literacy with folks as well. So a course called Mad City Money has been provided to folks if they wanted to opt in. And so we're bringing in all these other resources too. So again, sort of sticking with the efficiency of the program, the case management and the support is there. They have access to services. They have access to childcare. What they didn't have was enough money to really thrive. And so that's kind of the cool thing that YOBI actually added to that equation.
All right, thank you. Yeah, good answer. Are there other questions?
I actually had a question. So to me, the really interesting question is how much is enough, right? And that's one of the research questions you're trying to answer. So I guess I can't wait to hear what the second year data says, but how will you go about answering that? I think we as an organization deal with a lot more, we would like to be dealing with situational poverty, but we're not. We're doing more generational poverty where people come again and again, and it's not just one financial emergency, it's poverty level wages that aren't going to put them in a position to be successful. So I think there was a recent study on homelessness where someone said something like, oh, if I just got $5,000 at the time when I really needed it, that would have made a difference. And I'm sure they just picked this number out of wherever, but I think that's, to me, the real question is is there a number that, and is this approach that looks at basic income, how do you feel about that, and how will you know if that's enough?
I can give the head in the trees answer. So So I think that's a great idea. It's a really important question, and we haven't looked at it, but we could definitely in these data. And I don't want to overpromise what these data can support because we don't have a whole lot of people in this study, but it would definitely be worth looking at, like, okay, how much do different families get, and what does their do those trajectories look different? I think that would be worth doing. That's the trees version, just one of you big picture.
Nolan, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't really know how to answer that. I'm a social worker, and so I just want to keep giving until people stop asking. And but that's a really good question. You know, I think I would assume the folks at Stanford got the California poverty minimum study right. Even to me, though, just through my own family budget, like it sounds really difficult to get by. And I know there's many people just like my employees that are really struggling even on a good county wage. So I think that's a great question. How much is enough? And I think the other variable there is that enough this year, it could be totally different next year with gas prices and inflation and rent. And I mean, I've seen cost increases over the last 10 years that are just shocking to me. So I think that's a fantastic question. But I think, you know, I hope by the time you know, in this ride in this world that we have something like universal health care, housing for all, we have paid family. I mean, those are what we need is we need those guaranteed resources. And then I think you can kind of fill in the bits around that. And so that would be, it's not necessarily how much is enough, but how much other support can we guarantee folks in my mind to allow them to kind of to work on that remaining gap or hole. And we're a long ways from that, unfortunately. But I don't know the research answer to that. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I go by Katie and Catherine, just
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's good. I'm just clarifying. I was part of the Brookings Institute and Valley Vision helped convene the Capital Region Economic Assessment as part of this, you know, big statewide think about economic development. And through that, they provided some data that I found disturbing. So half of Yolo County's families, half of the children in Yolo County are in families that struggle to make ends meet. They're one paycheck away from housing insecurity and eviction. So by focusing on those in deepest poverty and most need, the hope is that you can provide sort of a trampoline effect, like the Stockton study often says, where folks can bounce back up again, but at the same time, entrenched deep chronic multi-generational poverty is difficult to budge too. So anyway, and that half of the children in Yolo County are teetering on that edge means that we need to get serious about it. The other thing that I'd say about the Capital Region's economic assessment is they said that if we wanted to lift just half of those children to self-sufficiency, you would need a minimum wage of $35 per hour, or on average about $71,000 per year per family. So if you're looking for hard data around lifting just half of the families that are insufficient, those are sort of the projections. And then there's the reality, as Rose is saying, you need to do studies to say, great, so you provide folks this funding. What, you know, does it increase inflation? Does it increase costs of rent? Does it impact, is it enough on average for everyone, or do certain families need additional supports to get out of poverty? And then there's the bigger question that Nolan is raising is, are we really committed to lifting children out of poverty? Which is the moral value statement that I think we're all circling around as we consider basic income and guaranteed income. And you know, there are some states that have banned pilot studies like this because they don't want it considered as a policy option.
What states are those? I can guess, but
Yeah, you can guess.
we start with an F. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'll drop a link into the chat.
Okay. I had oh, go ahead with your question, Nan.
Thank you very much for this very informative panel. My concern is that with these 76 families, there was apparently a drop off between the first and second year in the number of families. And then I guess a complete ending of the program for those families that had received the additional basic income. Now, what happens to those families with that additional boost removed? Do they just fall back into where they were before the program?
Yeah,
Is there
the
any-
drop the drop between years was a drop in respondents to the study. So it wasn't actually a drop in families getting the benefit amount. So by and large, I think all of the original families are still in some way, shape, or form receiving the benefit. And we've actually had, I don't have the exact data offhand, but we've had a couple what we call successful program exits from CalWORKs where they've actually earned enough income to get off the CalWORKs program. They're still receiving their basic income stipend, even though their income may have gone up. So there's, I think, a dozen or so families that are actually doing even better than that. I think to your point about the drop off, that was a big part of our consideration, right? So part of it was, do we want to do a $300 payment for 5 or 6 years? Or do we want to actually pull them out of poverty for 2? So I think I share your concern, but part of the study with this really is we were very clear with families it was 24 months and it was vastly more beneficial than most other programs. But every month we're reminding families, sadly, that clock is ticking down. And so Katie did mention that we're seeing a lot of anxiety in the study participants, or we have been seeing a lot of anxiety over the last couple of months, understandably so. But unfortunately, you know, it was either run the program at a lower benefit amount for a longer period of time, which we really didn't want to do, or run a program that actually pulled people out of poverty for a meaningful period of time, knowing that we have a pretty large cliff folks would fall off of. So again, the best we can do is prepare folks and communicate and do our best to help them cope with that. And in some cases, families have actually gotten to a point where their income actually won't take that big of a hit because they've stabilized, but in other cases, they will fall off that cliff. So luckily, they'll still be on CalWORKs, but they're going to go back down to that 1,122 a month versus where they're at today, which is unfortunate. But that's just how the program rolled out.
Are there other questions? Oh,
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
this is fascinating. Thank you to all the speakers. What are you guys thinking about how you would like get to the decision makers at the state level? Have you had those conversations of like how to replicate this, you know, in our county, but then some of the other counties, like if you look at the numbers, Santa Barbara and LA were right teetering on the 20% like Yolo County. So how are you trying to get to those decision makers in California?
It's very hard to do. I think, you know, honestly, newspaper coverage is one of our best. And again, Katie and I just talked with a SACB reporter today and yesterday. You know, we had a big front page spread last year. I'm hoping the data is very compelling. We have shared a lot of our findings with different associations, with the California Department of Social Services, with lobbyists in the governor's office, but they're bombarded by things like this all the time. So we're hoping that we have some very compelling results. Honestly, if any of you have connections or thoughts, we're all ears on that. Again, I'm hoping Mr. Newsom opens his paper on Sunday morning with his coffee, and we've got a big spread in there in the SACB. But I think, again, the scalability here, the targeted nature of this, and the fact that we're pulling families out of poverty, in my mind, is a bit of a game changer. To be honest, though, we've received a fairly cold reception from different groups. California Department of Social Services had a funding round for a whole series of GI pilots. They sort of intentionally boxed us out, which was unfortunate. Not knocking the mayors for guaranteed income, but we haven't gotten a whole lot of love or spotlight there either. I think maybe because we're a county. So in my mind, we're running one of the more innovative and hopefully effective programs across the nation, but it's been hard to get traction. But, you know, Katie said earlier, I think we just breached the 100 mark nationwide. So this is a fairly new item. I know about 4 or 5 months after the Stockton Seed program finalized, they started doing press releases. They got a ton of positive press. So, and it really sparked interest from other places. So I'm kind of hoping that happens. But again, we're all ears, we're all ideas. If you have ideas or connections, please let us know, because there's nothing I'd love more than to have the governor's office or someone high up at CDSS say, hey, tell me about this program. Because I really do believe it could be a way that we could lift thousands of families across the state of California out of poverty on an annual basis in a really effective, targeted, and frankly, fiscally responsible way.
We're almost out of time. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Nolan, Rose, and I didn't know your name was Katie. Every time I heard Katie, I went, what?
Yeah.
Thank you to all three of you. Wonderful presentation, super inspiring. It's really uplifting to hear all this. Our next speaker event will be, our speaker series will be late summer or early fall, and I'll let everyone know, or we'll send out notification to everyone. So thank you all for coming tonight, and it's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you guys so much.
I put my email and phone in the chat if anyone ever wants to connect or chat. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nolan. Yes.
Thank you all.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.